Hey, this is Sharif Yunus here with another episode of the Golden Hour, joined by Dr. Kevin Majors. Hey, Kevin, welcome back.
Hey, Sharif, it's great to be here.
Well, Kevin, we've been thinking a lot about the inventory lately and kind of seeing that it's very central to Optimal Work and that we want a central goal of ours is to help people grow in the inventory. So, one thing initially is just, hey, maybe if you're listening to this, maybe you should go take the inventory. I need to go take mine, I know. So, I'm going to do that just after this episode. But then also, we want to be helping people grow. So I thought maybe we could pinpoint this episode on one of our favorite inventory items, which is what is it, Kevin? I make productive use of small blocks of time.
Exactly.
And I know all of the inventory items have the property that they're mutually supportive. So if you grow in one, you grow in all of them. And we've done analysis to verify that statistical analysis. But it seems to me that this is one of the ones that really directly causes other ones to go up as well. So it's kind of I don't know, at the core of the inventory. I think it helps you in all these other areas too.
Yep. And I think that there are some inventory items that people can increase right away. There's some low hanging fruit, like exercising regularly. Okay. Once people get motivated they understand what exercise does for them, it's pretty fast change. So that's one of the early ones, perhaps, that changes. Some of those, like showing others around them that I appreciate them, or that bringing a spirit of service into everything you do, those things maybe are a little bit later. But what I like about this one, making good use of small blocks of time, is it's right in the middle of the growth curve. That when this one's changing, this I think is one of the ones that changes in bigger ways for a lot of people. When they first start getting, approaching optimal work and taking inventories, and then once they're getting some experience with it, I think though this one underlies a lot of different areas of growth. So I'm glad we get to focus on it, especially today.
Yeah, maybe we could just start by talking about what it means. What are these small blocks of time that we're talking about that we're trying to make good use of?
Yeah, when I came up with the question, the idea in my mind was not taking breaks, because I don't want people being productive on breaks. So the idea of that, like using my breaks productively, is I don't think the right thing. I was thinking more about what do you do if in a meeting, because my days are really planned, is unexpectedly it gets shortened for some reason, or if I'm say seeing patients in my office, what do I do if there's a no show? And now I have maybe 15 minutes, maybe well, typically be like at least 30 minutes, and what do I do with it? So in my mind, that's kind of what I was thinking of. You have an unexpected kind of windfall of 15 minutes, maybe 30, where maybe it's only 5 or 10 minutes, but it's just what do you do in those small blocks of time? And in my own experience, I saw that I could get much, much more meaningful things accomplished in the course of a week when I tried to use those small time blocks of time well. It's like it just multiplies time in a really wonderful way. That's why I put it in there.
Yeah. So yeah, I like that distinction. I think a lot of people initially interpret it because we advise people to make their day a series of high intensity sprints, which is another inventory item that maybe people think we're referring to the breaks in between those sprints. So you work intensely for an hour, you take a 10-minute break, you work intensely for an hour. To be clear, we're not talking about those small break times.
Boy, we
Those you
need we
should
need
be,
real breaks, true
yeah.
breaks.
And we've done a bunch of episodes on that of how to disconnect from the work, how to be more focused on being rather than doing, and how to really recover during those times, conversations, walking outside, etc. But here we're talking about these times in our schedule. Could I think you alluded to they're often unexpected. In my situation, I think they can be expected. It's like, okay, I know I'm going to have lunch at 1, and then I have a meeting that goes till 12:30. So what do I do between those times? But then they do also crop up unexpectedly too. So um, so the question is, so how do we use those times productively? Maybe a preliminary question is, how do what does it look like to use those times unproductively? what do you think is kind of the default for people, or what are the bad habits that people can fall into in your experience?
I would say the number one thing is probably email, because it's just a low intensity kind of activity that we always have more to do. And while I think that there could be ways of using email in that time, I don't think it's just good to like get lost in email until the time is up. So another thing just to say that this presupposes is that you do have some kind of schedule. If your day has no schedule, you have no small blocks of time. So sometimes people initially aren't sure what to do with this because like all I have are large blocks of time because all I have, there's it's when you start really trying to do more in your day and to turn your work into real high intensity sprints, then it sometimes will happen that you just finish faster than you expected. So that's the most common windfall of, like where there's this unexpected benefit of it comes when you have set out what you wanted to do in 1 hour of work and then you do it sooner than you thought you would. Now, if it's longer than you thought it would be, that's another way of thinking. You still stop at the end of the hour of work that you set, and then you're left with a small block of time as a remainder, and that is the perfect seed for the next period of intense work to get it started. So that's one idea. Is like just to lop off whatever you are in the work you're doing. Pause when the time runs up. Take a real break of being, not doing, and then come back and use that to get started with the next one. But still, you would want to lay out the rest of that next hour of work before you do it. Ideally, if you have the freedom to do that. But so yeah, but I think that it's a bigger question. Like when you just have these awkward moments of time, 10 minutes here, 15 minutes there, whether it's planned or unplanned, they really add up. I mean, it could easily be an hour a day of core work time. That that's like so 5 hours a week. Yeah, you're almost talking about an entire day a week. And I think it's actually even more than that. Because if you are living in such a way that you can make good use of small blocks of time and use them very wisely, your time just multiplies. And it's like having an extra day or two in the week of things because of the amount that now you're able to do with peace, not frenetically, but with a lot of peace. So it's a kind of peaceful productivity. If I had one regret is about this item, it's I make productive use of small blocks of time. Maybe puts too high, I don't know, a kind of premium on productivity. And maybe it should be I make the wisest use of small blocks of time.
Right. Yeah, in my experience, working on this item, it got me from feeling like I'm always a little bit behind to feeling like I'm always a little bit ahead. So it's the shift in the use of 10%, because I think you said it's about a day a week it can be. So it's 10 to 20% of my time, maybe even a little bit more. But that's the difference from, yeah, no individual thing is very big, but it's a way to get ahead on emails, and we'll talk a little bit about how to use the time well, but wisely, I should say. So it occurred to me also that maybe this is a helpful item for college students. And Kevin, you and I both work a lot with college students, but they'll have time in their schedule in between classes where they don't know exactly what to do with it because it's kind of an odd time, maybe not enough time for a meal or not enough time for a golden hour. I don't know if that's your experience too.
That
Is
is my
that time?
experience, but it's equally true with them as with everyone.
Hmm.
That if you're trying to plan your day well, you are going to end up with odd bits here and there. And that's, I would say, not a problem. It's actually a feature. And that these are where a lot of real growth can take place. So now to be thinking then positively, like when people are making really good use of these small bits of time, they do end up being more proactive than reactive. So they, instead of feeling like their life is being scheduled for them and they're just trying to keep up, they actually feel like they're actively scheduling it. So you want to use the small bits of time that you have on hand in the most proactive way possible so that you're using it to improve the rest of the work that you do. So I would say with that in mind that one of the best uses for a small unexpected block of time is to use it to, in advance, break down projects that you're working on, big things you have coming up, or even just another hour later that day that you're going to be working on. Set it up already in advance. So it gets you in the mindset that, okay, I have 5 minutes here. Well, okay, how could I use that in the best way to, like, how could I be breaking up my tasks? It's because you're not just thinking about that small block of time right now, but you're thinking of, okay, say writing a paper. We ask people to do a thought experiment sometimes in optimal work, that imagine you're writing a 10-page or 20-page paper. This is especially for college students. What would you do if you had to write it in 10 to 15-minute increments? How would you go about doing it? That's what we want people thinking of. We want people learning how to think of tasks in 10 to 15-minute steps, right? So that whatever the big thing you have, you think about uh, hanging blinds. This is little thing I was doing around the house, last weekend. But in hanging blinds, okay, well, you spend, what is it, 5 minutes measuring, and then you spend 10 minutes drilling, and then another 10 minutes installing. So we got to hang two sets of blinds, in 30 minutes. I didn't break it down in advance because really I was just like helping out someone else with it. But you could break it down. You could think of any little project, and it just makes it feel very doable. That there it is. Okay, this little thing that I've been putting off doing for a long time. Okay, how would I break it down? How would I lay out the steps, and even have time allotments with those steps? My point here is that's a great use of a little unexpected bit of time. Is just break up things you have coming towards you in advance, especially something you've been procrastinating. If there's any project you've been putting off doing, just use a little bit of time when it shows up to break that project down.
Yeah, that's so. Do you have a sense here, as you think about this, that the time can be used for anything, and we're here just suggesting some great ways to spend this time? Or do you say, hey, you should always do this? Like you should always be kind of focused on your projects and how you're breaking them down, and that's the advice? Or are there different options that you suggest for people?
If you're really trying to see how do you accomplish a lot, it's like, so for instance, one of the things I'm always having to do is give talks. And so those talks I prepare in advance in small blocks of time when things come up. And I'm always trying to work ahead. That I never want to prepare anything on the day I'm going to give it. Somehow, I don't know why, it takes twice as long. Maybe it's more of a perfectionist if I'm preparing it the day of. But if I prepare it in advance, I have the things, and the further in advance I prepare a talk, the less time it seems to take me to do it. And so it's a perfect use of something is I just take the talk I'm about to give, and I know what talks I have coming up. And so when I have an extra 10 minutes here or there, I can already start planning the talk, or I can review similar talks I've given and start to pull things out, knowing that if I have another 10 minutes, then I'll actually put them together into some kind of new thing. Or I might do 5 minutes of free writing just to get my mind pumping, on the topic. But I could do that anytime. I just know that there are these discrete units that go into preparing talks in advance, and it's like a little bit of research, a little bit of free writing, a little bit of reviewing past things, and then tying it all together. Really, each of those I could do in a small block of time, and as a result, I don't really need to set aside time during the week to preparing talks. If I'm doing it proactively throughout the week, it seems like they get prepared, and I never actually set time to do it. And so it ends up feeling pretty, like freeing. That preparing talks doesn't feel like a burden at all because I do it in little bits on the go.
It might be
And
something that you were dreading. I have to spend 2 hours. This is going to take my whole afternoon on Thursday. But
I find
now
if
that
I
you've actually
schedule
broken
time,
it down,
it's
yeah,
funny, but in preparing talks, if I schedule time, I will use twice the time.
yeah,
But if I do it in little bits,
hmm
I think I use a quarter of the time. So that's just one example of working ahead on things. So I think that that's a good go to. Uh, Another thing that is good is if you have some kind of, let's say that you have like daily plan of commitments. That, okay, like these are things I want to do every day, and they're fixed things. So I don't know, Sharif, what would you put on a list of things that are like just little daily things you would like to do?
Well, I have lower back problems, so I try to do
Uh-huh.
back exercise every day.
And how long
I
does that
do
take?
it's about 15 minutes.
Okay. So if you had 15 minutes show up,
Uh-huh.
there you have.
I
Okay,
would
you
do the
could do the
back,
back
yeah,
exercise.
exactly.
What
Uh,
else do you have there?
Even if I had just 5 minutes, my physical therapist said, "You can just do, the first couple exercise and that's fine." So,
Yeah.
the other thing well, this is kind of embarrassing, but I'm learning how to play the piano or relearning. So I'm
Mhm.
still not very good, so I'm not gonna be playing for people anytime soon,
Okay.
but that's another thing where, if I have 10 or 15 minutes kind of free. That might
Yeah,
be actually something that I would more do during a break though, because it's kind of
because it
restful
is a
and
great
not
use
work.
of a break. Is
Mhm,
that kind of musical stuff is, yeah.
that's right.
It's
And then, yeah, daily I have daily reading that I'm doing, so,
mhm.
professional reading. I have
Uh-huh.
this great book called Rapid Development, which for any programmers or software engineers
Yeah.
listening to this, I recommend.
Well,
Uh,
that's just having a book like that.
mhm.
You can read books so much faster if you have them like ready to read at odd moments. This is one of the reasons I really like using the Kindle app on the iPhone, is that there's always a good way of spending time, and that's how I get to read a lot of books, and that's how I do it. That there's that if someone's late to an appointment after, 2 minutes or something of being kind of just silently waiting, then I'd pull out something to read. Yeah, and I think books are a much better go-to thing than news. I don't think the things you read in news, in my mind, it's great that you have some news sources that you check from time to time, but I don't think that this is how you're going to feel like you wasted the day if you were, if I spent 15 minutes here, 15 minutes there, 15 minutes, and then that's an hour a day reading news, I would feel like I had wasted the day. But if I had been reading really good books that are like, help me with my professional work, and we talk about things here from what I'm getting there, that would feel like time really well spent. So I think people have to be careful about going to news, and just like in social media, but reading good books. And I think so when you're talking about what you read, that is that kind of stuff that's professional things like the rapid development book.
Yeah, so I guess one theme that's coming out that you're suggesting is that people need to think ahead of how they're gonna use this time. So people should have a um, a kind of sense of I have these several activities that are my default, my go-tos for these small blocks. One might be reading, one might be a larger project that they're working on for this week and that's already broken up into parts. Another one then is like a super default if they don't even have a specific thing is just to maybe actually break down some projects or work on your schedule.
Yep. Work
Uh,
ahead
Work
proactively on
ahead
the
on,
schedule
yeah.
and projects. Yep. That's exactly right.
Uh, so then the So I don't know if you have any more to add on that particular topic of how people can be planning these activities ahead, because I have some follow up questions on a
I think
slightly
people
different
need to
tack.
get to the point where it's a reflex. You don't want your use of small blocks of time to be something that takes strenuous effort, because it's going to come at the end of a block of time where you were working very intensely. So the more you form a habit where you have your typical go to kind of activity. Now, for me, if it's reading, it doesn't have to be a particular book because I'm going to finish them, but it's just the act of doing some professional reading at odd moments. I don't typically do enjoyable reading like fiction reading or fantasy. I don't do that during the workday ever because it's entertainment. And I don't think entertainment's the right idea for small blocks of time. I find that that just leads to a kind of lassitude, and as I was, telling you, I've kind of formed these habits of using small blocks of time well before YouTube existed. So I never had developed really, I think a lot of people are just tempted to go to YouTube, and I don't think that would be making the wisest use of it. One thing on email, just to mention briefly, is that I think it could be a helpful way of discarding emails. Like you could go through and be setting up your email. But I think email is better. It has a scheduled time that you do in a few chunks a day, ideally before meals because it's so distracting and new things come up. And then, but you could make those periods a little more efficient. If you wanted to, say you had 2 minutes, you can just go through and chunk things that you don't really need to attend to, but don't reply to anything. Save like reply time in certain chunks of the day. I don't follow that rule 100%, but that kind of approach I think is helpful. That I pre-process the email, going through and deleting things if I had an odd moment here or there, but don't get into responding. And then that kind of thing I could even do quickly from the phone. Uh,
So, in your experience, I think this might be something that a lot of people struggle with, especially those of us who did grow up with YouTube or form their work habits with YouTube as an available means of entertainment. So, for people, you kind of make it sound easy, like, okay, yeah, all you need is just these projects that you're working on, and maybe if you're writing a talk and you've broken it down into parts, and maybe the next step is to come up with an outline, and that should take about 15 minutes, then hey, the next time your meeting finishes early, just work on the outline. That makes it sound kind of easy, but for me, if I finish a meeting early, I'm already on my computer. My first thought is, okay, I wonder if there's news or YouTube. Those are kind of like just what my brain goes to. So that might be the sign of a bad habit that needs correction. Uh, but so how do people go from making that shift? In your experience, have you done a lot of the work just by breaking down the task and having a sense of what would be a good next thing to do? Or is there in the moment advice you can give for people for how to kind of break that?
I think they need to take a real serious look and see how would I typically waste time when I have these little bits that show up, and then come up with some clear strategies for how you want to handle those distractors. So if it's YouTube, then to have a more clear sense that I don't check YouTube during the workday or except at lunch. Although that's kind of sad if someone's just watching YouTube during, hopefully you have, but I would say something like that. That yeah, maybe you have like a morning period of work where you definitely don't check it ever. It's like in my mind, it's a little bit. Again, it's a generational thing. It would never occur to me to watch a movie in the middle of the day. It would feel kind of sad to watch a movie in the middle of the day. And now YouTube is a little different than that, but I think just come up with your own whatever you want, to then make it a clear thing that I will not then like have a clear strategy you're going to have with regard to YouTube. Have a clear strategy with social media. Have a clear strategy with email. Just try to identify the ways in which you waste time because these little blocks of time really add up. And so your attitude towards them is essential because it shows, in a sense, where your heart is. And it shows where your center of gravity is. Do we really want our center of gravity as YouTube? Or do we want it to be on things that matter more? And typically our work is the number one way we are either serving others or preparing ourselves so that we can serve others. So our work is the number one way that we transcend ourselves. So it's not just about being more productive, but it's also about asking yourself, where the way I use these small blocks of time, what can I learn about myself, my attachments, where my heart is, where I tend to gravitate? I was just recently reading this book that was written in 1520 by a guy named Francisco Osuna. And he says that one of the most important things you can talk about with someone else if you're seeking advice is what am I thinking about when I'm doing nothing else? Like, which is like asking, like, where's my center of gravity? Because if that's where you would actually want the most help is in changing your center of gravity. I thought that's incredibly wise advice. That this idea that the way we use what we do in the odd moments, in a way, it kind of shows us the substance underlying, like what's there. That when there's accidental change reveals the substance underlying something, and and these momentary changes in schedule that come, or these little odd moments, perhaps they show more than anything where our center of gravity is and where our heart is. That's why I think making the wisest use is actually the most important idea.
Yeah. Wow, Kevin, that's a very helpful idea. I think it's a very kind of deep note for us to end on for
Mm.
all of our listeners to kind of ponder that,
All right.
and me too. Uh,
Me too. Thank you very much for
okay, great, Kevin. Thanks so much. We'll be back next week.